to the Feel Good Podcast, a podcast bringing you all the juicy marketing of yesterday, today, and tomorrow, brought to you by skilled experts coming together to share our experience and knowledge on the latest marketing trends. Returning as your host, I'm Emily Knowles, the account coordinator for Clementine Creative Agency, a full-service creative marketing agency located in Atlanta, Georgia. If you missed the first 4 episodes of the podcast, you can still listen to them on YouTube or any podcast streaming app, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google. Now, if you're a returning listener, you might recall in the 3rd episode, I introduced you to one of the co-founders of Clementine Creative Agency, but today I'm honored to have with me the other co-founder, Marissa Davis.
Hey there, I'm Marissa Davis, creative director and co-founder of Clementine Creative Agency. I got my start in the marketing industry about 15 years ago, really with a focus on graphic design and web design. And over the years, I've really kind of grown this passion for the branding element involved because I really love and enjoy being part of that branding process from the very beginning of a business and kind of talking to business owners about what their vision is and being able to pull that all together into telling this visual story of what their brand is and what they can provide for their customers.
And you see that reflected in Clementine and all that we do with branding as a main service.
Yeah, so surprisingly enough, branding kind of became one of the launching points of Clementine. When we started about 5 years ago, we, in our previous experience, had gotten a lot of experience with the logo and brand identities for a number of different projects, and Jennifer and I really took hold of that and kind of fell in love with that whole branding process. And, like I said, being able to pull all of these ideas and thoughts together into a visual presence. And so that ended up being one of the launching points of why we decided to go off on our own and start this marketing branding agency. And, that's still one of the main focal points of what we do for our customers.
Absolutely. And, really honing in on the point that we're full service marketing. So we take that branding element and we make sure that it follows through in each of the services that we provide for our client. Because you can take that branding and make sure it's cohesive and integrated in each part of the services we may be providing to a client.
Absolutely, yeah. It kind of just helps being an in-house full-service team. We're able to take all of the different elements and make sure that they create this cohesive story for all of the clients that we're working with and their products.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's start at the beginning. So, because I know you said you had 15 years in the industry, but we do know that branding and what exactly is branding and how we classify it, that started, many, many years ago.
Sure. So, I'm not new to this industry, but I'm a lot newer than the visual language actually is. And if you think about taking it back, as almost all the way to the dawn of civilization, where you had cave drawings and hieroglyphics used to communicate ideas. And that's kind of really where branding all, the visual language really started, was being able to communicate an idea through a visual means that kind of cuts through language barriers, so you don't have to communicate through audio reasons and language. You can communicate all of that through a visual storytelling.
Well, and today, in this modern age, we can even, compare that to emoticons, or better known as emojis, how they really reflect emotion, which is pretty universal. Like if you send a sad face, everyone can know what a sad face means.
Yeah, and especially when you think about the global society that we live in and how, the dawn of the internet or the invention of the internet has really created this ability to talk, outside of your nation and outside of your language and be able to communicate with people across the entire world. So having a language or a visual language that can break those language barriers is really important and serves a great purpose today. And I think emoticons are a really interesting way to look at how that story is being told today, whereas, 30, 40, 50 years ago, it wasn't told that way at all.
Right. You can have a whole story, like a whole entire thread sent back and forth on just emojis itself.
Absolutely. And I probably wouldn't know how to translate any of that, but I'll do my best.
But it's easily, the information that's continuously transmitted today, that it's such a high volume that we're taking in this visual language at such a fast rate?
Oh, yeah. So, interesting tidbit, 90% of the messages that we're being told every day are being told through visuals. So, the thought that your visual image can send a message much faster, in fact, 60,000 times faster than reading text, is kind of fascinating. So, pulling in that idea of having a branding element surrounding communicating that vision in one logo or one icon is like so important.
And that being part of your overall brand. And so that builds up over time, these symbols, these hieroglyphics, all the way to emojis today. And you can kind of see that this leads up into you having that one icon or logo. And I'm curious to know if our listeners even knows what the first trademark logo was.
Yeah, I think you'd probably think that it was maybe like a Coca-Cola
or Levi.
Or Levi's, I think, is a really great example of, but that's not right. So you're going to have to check the website, right? We're going to put a couple, that's your hint that it's not those. And you can check the website and see what the first trademarked logo actually was.
It'll be definitely defined in our blog. You have to take a guess and see if you're right about that. So what defines a brand mark?
Well, brand mark is really more than just a logo. I think a lot of people, when they think of a brand, they think of just a logo, and it's really more than that. It's, everything from simply a logo mark, or a lot of companies use type only, but it encompasses the entire company's vision, from your voice. It can be everything from the way that you say something, the language, the text that you use, and the words that you use to tell that personality, all the way down to color palettes and any number of icons and logos and uniforms and things like that you can use to. It all kind of becomes part of your branding. Taglines too, eventually.
You kind of have all the intangibles and tangibles that make up your brand as a whole.
Yeah, and when you think about, like walking into a football stadium, for instance, to go to a game, and you see, everything that you're looking at, everything that's around you has been meticulously placed where it's at and in the way that it's at to communicate that brand story to you. So, everything from the color of their shoes to the helmets to the icon markings or logo markings on the field, all of that is being told in this story.
Right. To where you're sitting in the stadium, your seats themselves. If you have a team that is red and black, you wouldn't have green and orange seating.
Oh, yeah. That would be a big no-no in Bulldog Nation, right?
Exactly, specifically. So when you think about what this brand mark is, how has it come about to be successful? What allows a brand mark to be successful?
Sure. So there are a lot of elements that really go into a successful brand mark, and some of them are a lot more easily achieved than others. One of the more important ones is kind of communicating your company's vision, and being authentic to your brand and to your company vision, which really kind of pulls people in from a personal standpoint and makes them feel a little bit closer to you. And I think a good example of that would be the Disney logo, which everybody's familiar with, and it's a very long-standing logo. It all started with a signature, Walt Disney's signature, and it, really encompasses the signature behind the man of this vision to create a fun and entertaining world for kids. And then, later on, they added the castle, which became its own magical element and kind of brought in the theme of the theme parks. It actually resembles the entranceway to the theme parks, which I think is really interesting.
Right.
But it all still comes back to that one logo. And I think anybody from the age of your age to, kids all the way up to, 60, 70 years old recognizes that logo throughout time as the man, the vision, the magic that is Disney.
The magic that is Disney. And I think when we talk about how branding can even be a logo that simply becomes its own icon or emblem, you take that Disney D that's within the signature, and that stand alone, just like the castle does, reflects Disney.
Yeah, I mean, we don't even call it we all call it Disney now, but, it used to be Walt Disney.
Right.
So they were able to take off the Walt, and it still stands alone on its own as this iconic element.
And similarly, with our own clients, we've worked with, brands itself that we've been able to take the full name, but it becomes more of just an emblem. So like Marietta Square Market, for example, we're able to create their logo, but then pull from it just the one M emblem standing as the logo and brand.
Yeah, and I think the, taking into account that theme of authenticity there, we created that logo based on the tracks, based on its iconic location next to the train tracks in downtown Marietta Square. And we've got the little square icon that's in the center of the logo that the two M's kind of nest themselves around. And it's really, symbolic of its landmark location and that there's only one Marietta Square Market.
That's right. And you start to see the M in itself, and that's kind of what's branded onto material and assets. And then off the bat, similar to Disney being just the Disney signature D, Marietta Square Market being that M.
Absolutely, yeah.
And would you consider a brand that evokes emotion being successful as well?
Oh, yeah, totally. If you think of a lot of, charitable organizations, for instance, they utilize imagery that sets the thought in your head of, this is something that I want to give to. Like, it gives you that feeling of compassion, or, you can pull in color psychology into that. Yeah. And certain colors have certain meanings.
Where we see a lot of fast food restaurants use red and yellow, because that's supposed to evoke the emotion of hunger.
Yep.
Or the Athens Humane Society, they use like a puppy dog with big eyes, and that draws the compassion.
Yep, exactly. And you look at those, or you see the commercials, and you go, "Oh yes, I want to give."
Exactly. Easily pulls you in.
Yep.
But it doesn't always have to be, I feel, like a feeling that takes on action.
No, it definitely doesn't. One of my favorite logos throughout time that they've, recently rebranded is the logo for the Bahamas. And it's this, beautifully colorful, if you haven't seen it, you should look it up. It's this beautifully colorful, versatile, active, fun, and fresh logo that gives you this feeling that you really want to be there. Yeah. And it pays homage to the 70-something islands of the Bahamas with all of their different little marks. And, they can really utilize these interesting petal shapes in all of their other branding materials and collateral to set off this really interesting symbolic kind of emotion around you wanting to be here. And I think every time I look at it, it kind of transports me to somewhere else, which is probably something that all of us can use a little bit of these days.
Exactly. And so those emotions too, those are kind of like, they're not in your face so much. They're not explicitly stating these are the emotions you should receive from this branding. They're like kind of hidden, unspoken, but it reflects it because it's done so well.
Oh yeah.
So on the opposite end of that, though, you can have some brands that will speak directly to its audience.
Oh yeah.
That brings like-minded audiences to the brand.
And that's actually really important, because if you think about certain logos or certain brands, they need to speak to the audience that they are catering to, right? If you have a kids brand, you don't want it to feel very stark and sterile and, dark, and you want it to be fun and playful.
Yeah, one that comes to mind is Toys R Us. Toys R Us, the lettering just in itself is, more playful. It has the backwards R in the middle, kind of mimicking the children's handwriting and how they don't actually write, all straight lined or anything of that nature. So the R backwards is just more a playful element that speaks more to the kid demographic they're looking at.
Oh, yeah. And, I'm going to throw you for a loop here and give you the opposite end of that spectrum, which is kind of, if you think about, a lot of people think about products only as brands, but there are so many other things that are brands. People and spokespeople can be their own brands in and of themselves. One example would be Metallica. The band Metallica has really built this brand and of this heavy metal music and kind of this hard rock, and they, their logo speaks to that audience. I mean, there's no way that you look at that logo and say, oh, this is, for lullabies. Or, I mean,
you don't see too many dolls from Toys R Us having Metallica.
No, exactly. And, they have metal in the name. They've got these sharp edges, these dark colors. Like, there's no getting around what this brand is and who their audience is.
Exactly. And the thing is, if it didn't connect with its audience, would it even matter? What's the point?
Exactly. I mean, if you create a brand or a logo that does not speak to your audience, then you've lost all of that effort. So it really is so imperative that a brand thinks about all of the avenues and aspects involved with their company and their vision, and speaks to as many of those as they can in their branding. That's why branding is so important.
Yeah, absolutely. And some people think that a brand being successful is synonymous with it being, so front of mind that it becomes a household name.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to ask, does it always mean for it to be successful just because a brand becomes, such a household name that it then becomes genre anonymous?
Yeah, I think, there's a point at which it turns from good to bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great situation when everybody thinks of, fast food and they automatically think of McDonald's.
Right.
But it's a totally different story when you say, hey, I need a Kleenex, and you're actually using Puffs.
Or if you think of off the bat for phones or technology, you automatically think Apple or Microsoft, but not necessarily Intel or Dell.
Right. Yeah, so they've become these big brands that are, kind of overtaking the industry that they're in, and that's a great thing to a certain point. But then when does it get too far? Is there a moment where, like I said, where something, overtakes its own meaning and people use it as a household name? There have been a lot of circumstances in history where brands have lost their trademark.
Yeah, you almost spend so much money to make sure your brand is successful, but then it kind of reaches that ceiling of success that you're now defending it, spending a lot of money to defend it, not to lose the trademark.
Yep.
And I think a good example would be Zipper.
Yeah, I mean, who knew? I didn't know.
I didn't know.
I didn't know that Zipper was a trademarked element, and people utilized it. So it became so ubiquitous that, people utilized it so much that it became, they lost their trademark.
Right.
And what do? So then you have to rebrand.
Yeah, and sometimes, rebranding, it's not always meant because someone lost a trademark. Mm-hmm. Sometimes rebranding happens for other reasons. And why would you say brands rebrand?
Yeah, there are a couple of reasons that spring to mind. One being that, if your brand no longer connects with your audience, that's a great reason to rebrand or to look into rebranding. If you're trying to reach a wider audience or, cast a wider net, I think that's a great reason to rebrand. If you've lost kind of that, with the times, you've lost a little bit of that fresh quality that you were looking for, and your audience has stayed here, but, time has evolved, and you haven't, your brand needs to evolve with it. So those are great reasons.
I think for us, one of our clients, Pen and Partners, they definitely we did a rebrand for them. And one of our reasons for rebranding was so that they could reach a wider audience, because they're a French-based company who then moved to America and needed to expand their audience. And so we had to do a rebrand for them. Yeah,
and we kind of took a look at their, again, with all of our clients, we take a look at the materials that they have. We sit down and talk with them about what their vision is, what they are looking to achieve with their business, and utilize all of that information to go through the process, the rebranding or originally branding process, to say, okay, what are the key elements that we really need to bring out here? So with Pennon, I think, is a great example of a brand that not only is casting a wider net, but is also evolving through time. So we were able to really refine that logo, make it feel a little more appropriate to what they do to reach the audience that they're trying to reach, because they're in technology. So we added some dots to the outer circle, and then we took the pennons, which are those little flags on the top of a sailboat.
Right.
We took those elements that they had in their previous logo and just kind of smoothed them out, refined them a little bit, made them feel a little more like waves as well as pennons. And then once we refined that logo mark itself, we took all of those aspects and all of the previous thought that we had and developed an entire suite and kind of style guide for them moving forward. And one of the important elements there that we pulled in was the color palette.
Right, because, the French flag is red, white, and blue, very similar to American flag, which is red, white, and blue. And you saw that reflected within their branding as well. Yeah,
so we took that color palette, added a little bit of red, added some darker blues, and really kind of created this nautical, it pulled in not only the French flag and the American colors of the American flag, but it also pulled in the classic nautical elements, which are true to the vision for their brand of directing people and helping them make transformations.
And that we would deem as a successful rebrand.
Success.
But not everyone has successful rebrands.
Unfortunately not, no.
Some people don't always hit. They may have intentions of wanting to reach a wider audience or, evolving with the times, and that is their intention. But a lot of times if they don't connect with the audience or their rebrand was misinterpreted, a lot of times they aren't successful.
Yeah, I think my best example of that is the recent Gapgate of 2010.
The Gapgate.
So much so that they created a name for it called the Gapgate. This,
almost a conspiracy of sorts.
So yeah, this logo lasted a historic 6 days in the industry. Once it was released, it got immediate, backlash from the audience and kind of the general public that nobody quite understood what they were going for. And so they, essentially took a step back in a multitude of ways, took a step back, and 6 days later, they released their new logo. It was the old logo.
So if you would have blinked, you would have missed it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that, if you weren't privy to all of this information, you would have thought, well, Gap didn't change their logo. Or maybe they did, I remember it, but now it's the old logo?
Yeah, so the interesting, conspiracy part of that theory is, you look at it, you look at the whole story, and you go, was this really terrible branding and terrible marketing? Mm-hmm. Or was it maybe, in fact, a well-executed PR stunt?
Yeah, because, it did have a lot of conversation surrounding it. It created a lot of impressions, and people had Gap on their mind.
That's right.
So who's to say if it is successful or not? But I guess that's part of Gapgate.
Yeah.
For me, an example that comes to mind is Animal Planet. Mm-hmm. Because back in my childhood, we had Animal Planet's logo being, the simple text, but with the elephant in the world hanging up above the elephant's trunk.
Yeah.
And to me, that just is a feeling of nostalgia that I loved that logo. I connected with it from a young age. And then they did rebrand, and it lasted for 10 years, this rebrand, from 2008 to 2018. But really, it was just simple text, some shades of like a light green, and then they had a couple of one letter on its side, the M, and
Mm-hmm.
then some skinnier letters. Mm-hmm. But that didn't connect with me. And I think that would deem it almost unsuccessful because I didn't have a connection with it or have a realization as to what the sideways M, which is the misinterpreting part.
Yeah, I think, that's a really good example of like, what was the message behind this? What are they trying to send? And, I don't know that they connected with their audience. I don't know that it truly resonated, and maybe it did for some, but it certainly didn't for you.
Right.
And I think, they came to that realization again a few years ago when they re-released, or was it this year, that they re-released a new logo.
A new logo, and the new logo being a more, modern font, more like perfectly like rounded font, and then have like a blue elephant leaping over the text of Animal Planet. So they at least brought an animal back into it.
Yeah.
So that's the important part.
They brought the elephant back.
You have a connection with it at least.
Yeah. So I think, when you look at that logo, that's kind of like, we took a step forward, maybe it wasn't the right step forward, and then, it was kind of like bad rebranding gone good again. So, they've kind of reinvented it yet again. Granted, it's to a newer audience, which, I know that you hold that original logo very near and dear to your heart, and I'm sure that there are some classic t-shirts that you can still buy with that logo on it.
Vintage is the new trend.
There you go. But, they're really trying to reach a younger audience. Kids, though. So they brought back this fun, playful elephant, and they, the text on it became a lot softer, more personalized. It feels very friendly and, kind of simplified everything, which is kind of the way that branding is going. Their old logo, original logo with the earth and the elephant really had so much going on that when you think about even rebranding or branding in general, you have to think about the different places that you're going to implement this logo. Yeah. And today with social media, it's so important that your logo reads small, in a very small space and like in a circular kind of fashion, because that's where everything is right now.
Yeah, with your profile on Instagram or Facebook, even Twitter, it's always going to be that circle profile image that you have to have that your logo has to fit within.
Yep.
And who's not to say 25 years from now they rebrand again and someone's like, I had such a connection with a little blue elephant leaping over Animal Planet. True. What happened? But from this conversation, and talking about where we came from with branding and how it started with symbols and hieroglyphics to today with a visual language and needing to know how to make a successful brand, what are some major takeaways that any client can take from this conversation?
Yeah, I think, again, what you think about as branding is more than just the logo. So it's really encompassing the entire thought behind your company, your vision, your products, your audience, and pulling all of that together into a set of materials or a set brand voice, a color palette and color theme that you utilize across all of your materials.
That's right.
Your personality has to be consistent and cohesive across all of your materials. So, take all of that into account, and really, it's so important to work with a professional at the beginning of this process, because the ideation process is so important. It's such an integral part of the future vision for your business. And wouldn't you rather have a brand, set out at the get-go that's incredibly successful?
That's right. And to learn more about rebranding and branding in general, you can check out our blog post on the Clementine website, ClementineCreativeAgency.com. We'll talk some of our favorite rebrands and some more on Clementine's branding at the link in the bio. Thank you.
Thanks.